Why are so many boys falling behind, dropping out, or giving up altogether? Why are men told to apologize for their very nature? If you're a man, or care about one, this might be the most important thing you watch all year. Something deeply unsettling is unfolding across our education systems, our households, and our cultural landscape, but too few are talking about it. Boys, once seen as the natural drivers of innovation, leadership, and productivity, are increasingly falling behind. The statistics are not merely alarming, they're damning. From early childhood classrooms to university lecture halls, boys are disengaging, underperforming, in many cases, quietly disappearing. This isn't a matter of isolated cases or anecdotal evidence. Decades of data reveal the same trend across Western countries. Boys are less likely to graduate from high school, far less likely to enroll in or complete college, and more likely to face suspensions, expulsions, and disciplinary actions at nearly every level of schooling. In the United States, for instance, women have earned more bachelor's degrees than men every year since 1982. Today, they make up nearly 60% of college graduates. Meanwhile, boys are statistically more likely to drop out, repeat a grade, or be diagnosed with learning disabilities. The picture becomes even starker when we examine elementary and middle school performance. Boys are outperformed by girls in reading and writing from the earliest grades, and this gap persists and even widens with time. It's not that boys are inherently less intelligent or less capable. The problem lies in a system that increasingly fails to meet their developmental needs. Our schools have grown more structured, sedentary, and linguistically focused, traits that, while not inherently bad, often clash with how young boys learn best. We've designed classrooms where success is measured by how still you sit, how neatly you write, and how well you conform. But biologically and neurologically, boys tend to have higher activity levels, more impulsivity, and a greater need for hands-on learning. Instead of adapting to these differences, the system labels them as defects. Many boys, when faced with a school environment that doesn't affirm their nature, shut down. They become the troublemakers, the underachievers, the ones who slip through the cracks. They're medicated, isolated, or pushed aside rather than guided and understood. Outside of academics, boys are also experiencing a steep social decline. They are more likely to suffer from loneliness, addiction, and mental health struggles. Suicide rates for young men are significantly higher than for young women. And yet, we don't talk about it. We tell boys to man up. In recent years, a cultural narrative has taken hold that frames masculinity not as a complex and potentially noble human trait, but as a dangerous force to be restrained, tamed. This narrative, widely referred to as the concept of toxic masculinity, has grown beyond critical analysis of harmful behaviors and evolved into a sweeping indictment of male identity itself. The damage from this shift is subtle but profound, particularly for young boys and men who are trying to navigate their place in the world. What was once an effort to confront real problems, such as aggression, abuse, or emotional repression, has, in many circles, turned into a generalized suspicion of traditionally masculine traits. Traits such as ambition, assertiveness, competitiveness, and even stoicism are increasingly interpreted as signs of pathology rather than aspects of a well-rounded character. In classrooms, media, and even corporate training sessions, the messaging is often unmistakable. To be masculine is to be part of the problem. This ideological shift doesn't just live in think pieces or academic lectures, it has real-world consequences. Boys are growing up in an environment where they are subtly, and sometimes directly, told that their instincts are harmful, that their energy is disruptive, and that their natural inclinations should be curbed for the sake of progress. At an age where identity is fragile and forming, the message many boys hear is not, be a better man, but don't be a man at all. As a result, confusion takes root. Boys and men become uncertain about how to behave, what is expected of them, and whether there is even a socially acceptable way to express their masculinity. They hear that silence is complicity, but also that speaking up as a man is suspect. They are told to lead, but not to dominate, to be strong, but also vulnerable, to protect, but not to patronize. These contradictory demands create a psychological no man's land, one that many boys retreat from altogether by disengaging from civic life, education, and meaningful relationships. The conversation around masculinity has become so loaded, so ideologically rigid, that there is little room left for nuance. The recognition that masculinity, like femininity, can be both beautiful and destructive depending on how it is expressed, has been overshadowed by blanket statements that frame masculinity as inherently violent, oppressive, or outdated. This is not progress. This is prejudice in a new form, one that is socially sanctioned and widely applauded. It is worth remembering that throughout history, masculinity has produced both villains and heroes. The same masculine drive that has been weaponized in war and domination has also built cities, rescued nations, and sacrificed itself in defense of others. The capacity for physical strength, risk-taking, and stoic endurance, traits often coded as masculine, has also served as the backbone of protection, leadership, and provision. But when boys grow up hearing only the dark half of that story, when masculinity is presented as a liability rather than a strength to be honed, the result is shame. Not reflection, not improvement, but shame. This shame becomes internalized. It contributes to the growing crisis of male identity, where boys either attempt to suppress who they are or swing to the opposite extreme in reaction, adopting exaggerated, performative versions of masculinity that are just as unhealthy. In both cases, what's missing is a model of mature masculinity, one that allows boys to see themselves not as broken or dangerous, but as capable of growth, responsibility, and virtue. At the heart of this issue is a failure of imagination and compassion. We have become so focused on critiquing the abuses of masculine power that we have forgotten how to nurture its potential. Boys need guidance, not guilt. They need mentors, not moral lectures. They need a society that encourages them to develop strength, not suppress it. Without that, we are not only failing our boys, we are impoverishing our future. Modern educational and cultural policies often operate under the assumption that boys and girls are functionally interchangeable, that with the right training and environment, any natural differences between the sexes can be erased. This well-meaning but flawed belief has led to a wave of initiatives that seek to re-engineer how children are taught, socialized, and assessed based on an ideal of uniformity rather than diversity. While the intention may be equality, the outcome has been anything but equal, especially for boys, who are increasingly penalized by systems that ignore the biological and psychological realities of male development. Scientific research in neurobiology, developmental psychology, and cognitive science has consistently shown that boys and girls, on average, differ in how they process information, manage emotions, and interact with the world around them. Boys tend to develop verbal skills more slowly than girls, exhibit higher levels of physical activity, and show stronger spatial and mechanical reasoning in early development. Their brains are wired for different patterns of stimulation and learning. They often benefit from movement, competition, hands-on exploration, and a clear structure of consequences and rewards. Yet instead of designing environments that leverage these strengths, our schools have adopted pedagogical models that cater overwhelmingly to traits more commonly found in girls: verbal fluency, quiet focus, compliance, and prolonged sedentary behavior. The result is that boys are systematically placed at a disadvantage in early education. Classrooms that favor long periods of sitting, constant verbal instruction, and an emphasis on emotional sharing can become inhospitable to young boys who are still developing the skills necessary to meet those expectations. Rather than being seen as different, these boys are seen as deficient. Their restlessness is labeled as hyperactivity, their reluctance to speak about feelings is labeled as emotional immaturity, and their preference for competition is viewed as aggression. Many are medicated, disciplined, or pathologized before they even reach adolescence. This cultural blind spot isn't limited to education. In popular discourse, we're told that gender is a purely social construct, that any differences in behavior or outcomes must be the result of bias or conditioning. While it's true that culture shapes many aspects of how gender is expressed, it is equally true that biology plays a foundational role in shaping temperament, cognition, and preference. Denying this complexity in favor of a one-size-fits-all model not only leads to ineffective policy, it actively harms those who do not conform to the model, especially boys. The consequences of this denial are widespread. As boys progress through a system that misunderstands their nature, many begin to disengage entirely, Academic underachievement becomes normalized. Behavioral issues escalate. Self-esteem erodes. And as these patterns accumulate, boys begin to internalize the belief that success and conformity are simply not meant for them. They retreat into video games, online subcultures, or apathy, not out of laziness, but out of alienation. They don't see themselves reflected in the systems meant to support them, so they detach. Worse still, the very attempt to treat boys and girls identically has paradoxically deepened inequality. By ignoring real differences, we have created structures that serve one group at the expense of another. Girls are thriving academically in this system, not because they are more capable, but because the system has been unconsciously redesigned around their average strengths. Boys, on the other hand, are being asked to perform in ways that often contradict their natural developmental trajectory. Instead of acknowledging and addressing this, institutions continue to double down on the same misguided premises, often promoting policies that further erode the space for boys to be boys. We need only look at how success is increasingly defined to understand the bias at play. Emotional openness, verbal articulation, and collaborative decision-making, while certainly valuable traits, have become the gold standard in educational and corporate settings. Traits traditionally associated with masculinity, such as assertiveness, independence, and risk-taking, are often viewed with suspicion or deemed outdated. This value hierarchy doesn't just exclude boys. It sends a clear message about which forms of behavior and identity are desirable and which are to be corrected. Boys are not broken versions of girls. They are their own distinct individuals, shaped by both nature and nurture, and they require approaches that honor that distinction. Ignoring the psychological and biological differences between the sexes may seem progressive on the surface, but it is, in practice, a regressive move, one that denies boys the tools and support they need to grow into capable, confident, and grounded men. At a time when conversations around gender have never been louder, one critical issue remains largely neglected: the importance of a healthy, affirmative, and realistic vision of masculinity. Boys and men today are caught in the crossfire of conflicting cultural messages. On one hand, they are told that their traditional instincts, to protect, to lead, to compete, to endure, are dangerous relics of a patriarchal past. On the other, they are scolded when they fail to live up to the very roles society still quietly expects of them. This contradictory environment has left a generation of young men confused about who they are supposed to be and uncertain of what it means to be good, strong, and masculine. There is an urgent need to redefine masculinity not as a threat to be neutralized, but as a strength to be cultivated. This does not mean turning a blind eye to harmful behaviors or denying that men, like women, are capable of wrongdoing. It means acknowledging that masculinity itself is not the enemy. In fact, when channeled properly, masculine traits are not only beneficial, they are essential to the well-being of families, communities, and societies at large. A healthy vision of masculinity is not about dominance, emotional repression, or violence. It is about responsibility, courage, discipline, and honor. These are qualities that, historically, many cultures across time and geography have associated with the ideal man. Not because of arbitrary tradition, but because these traits contribute to the protection and flourishing of the group. A man who takes ownership of his actions, who rises in moments of crisis, who protects the vulnerable, who endures hardship for the sake of others, this is not a caricature or a relic. This is a model that boys need to see, hear, and strive toward. The trouble is, too many boys are growing up without this model. Fatherlessness is a growing crisis, particularly in the Western world. Millions of boys are raised in homes without a consistent, present, engaged male role model. Without guidance, their understanding of manhood is left to be shaped by popular culture, peer pressure, and fragmented social cues. Some internalize the message that to be a man is to dominate. Others hear that to be a man is to apologize for existing. Both extremes are equally destructive, and both result from a lack of positive masculine identity. This absence of vision has ripple effects. When boys are not given a framework for their strength, it becomes chaos. When they are not taught how to lead with integrity, they lead with impulse. When they are not shown how to handle failure, they lash out or shut down. A culture that refuses to define manhood will raise young men who are either afraid to claim their identity or desperate to assert it in distorted, toxic forms. The result is not liberation, it's disorientation. Contrary to popular belief, boys don't need less masculinity. They need better masculinity. They need to know that it is good to be strong, but strength must serve others. They need to know that it is good to be assertive, but assertiveness must be rooted in justice and humility. They need to know that real power is not found in dominance, but in self-control. These are not abstract ideals. They are teachable, livable virtues, and they begin with adults who are willing to speak honestly and lovingly about what it means to be a man. Reclaiming masculinity also means creating spaces where boys are celebrated for their unique strengths and given the tools to refine them. This doesn't require the exclusion or belittling of girls. Equality does not mean sameness. A healthy society does not elevate one sex by silencing the other. In fact, when boys are allowed to develop their strengths in a way that is rooted in virtue, they become better partners, better fathers, better workers, and better citizens. A culture that nurtures strong men ultimately benefits everyone. Because strength, when married to purpose and compassion, is not a threat but a gift. What we're witnessing now is not the failure of masculinity, but the failure to nurture it correctly. For too long, the conversation around gender has focused on deconstructing old models rather than building better ones. That work is important. It is only half the picture. Tearing down without rebuilding leaves nothing but a void. And into that void step confusion, resentment, and alienation. Cannot expect boys to grow into men if we are not willing to tell them what manhood looks like when it is at its best. We cannot expect them to thrive if we continue to pathologize the very traits that, when refined, allow them to protect, serve, and lead. Masculinity, like any human force, is a tool. It can destroy or it can build. The outcome depends entirely on the values we attach to it, the models we provide, and the culture we create around it. The challenges facing boys and men today are not born from masculinity itself, from a culture that refuses to understand, nurture, and guide it. When society tells young men they are dangerous by default, denies the reality of their nature, and fails to offer them strong, healthy models of manhood, it creates a vacuum, one that leads to confusion, alienation, and withdrawal. The solution is not to suppress masculinity, but to reclaim and refine it. Boys need to know that their strength has purpose, that their instincts can be virtues when guided by responsibility, and that being a man is not a flaw to overcome, but a path to walk with discipline, courage, and moral clarity. Rebuilding a culture that respects and supports the development of good men isn't just about saving boys. It's about securing the future of society itself.